We're continuing our reading of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10. Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. Brahma Muhurta Prabhu began with text number 10 yesterday, and we're continuing. And as a reminder, the text goes like this. Puruṣa-avatāra vinirbhidya yadāsau sa vinirgataḥ. Ātmano yanam anvicchann srākṣīc śucīḥ. Puruṣa means the Supreme Person, Paramatma, who's the topic of this Bhagavatam, Ete chamsha kalapumsam, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, Indrahari, Vyakulam Lokam, Mridyantu Yuge Yuge. And of this chapter, ṇḍaṁ means, it's a quiz. Remember ṇḍaṁ? Means the universes. Vinirbhidya, actually, so it's more interactive. I'll say, please repeat. Vinirbhidya. Making them each separately situated. Yada, when, asau, the same. Saha, he, the Lord, vinirgataḥ, came out, ātmano, of himself. Yanam, lying in place, anvicchann, desiring. Apa, water. Srākṣīc, created. Chuciḥ, the most pure. śucīḥ, transcendental. After separating the different universes, the gigantic universal form of the Lord, Mahā-Viṣṇu, which came out of the Causal Ocean, the place of appearance for the first puruṣa-avatāra, entered into each of the separate universes, desiring to lie on the created transcendental water, Garbhodaka. Purport: after analysis of the living entities and the Supreme Lord, Paramatma, the independent source of all other living beings, Srila Sukadeva Goswami is now presenting the prime necessity for devotional service to the Lord, which is the only occupational business of all living entities. The Supreme Lord Sri Krishna and all his plenary portions and extensions of plenary portions are non-different from one another, and thus the supreme independence is in each and every one of them. In order to prove this, Sukadeva Goswami, as promised to King Parikshit, describes herein the independence of the puruṣa-avatāra, personality of Godhead, even in the sphere of the material creation. Such activities of the Lord are also transcendental, and therefore they are also called Lila, or pastimes of the Absolute Lord. Such pastimes of the Lord are very conducive to the hearers for self-realization in the field of devotional service. Some may argue, why not then relish the transcendental Lila of the Lord as exhibited in the land of Mathura and Vrindavan, which are sweeter than anything in the world? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur replies that the pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan are meant to be relished by advanced devotees of the Lord. Neophyte devotees will misunderstand such supreme transcendental activities of the Lord, and therefore the Lord's pastimes in the material sphere related to creation, maintenance, and destruction are verily relishable by the prakrita, or mundane devotees of the Lord. As the yoga system mainly based on bodily exercises is meant for the person who is too much attached to the bodily conception of existence, similarly, the Lord's pastimes related to the creation and destruction of the material world are for those who are too materially attached. For such mundane creatures, the functions of the body and the functions of the cosmic world through physical laws in relationship with the Lord are also therefore included in understanding the lawmaker, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The scientists explain the material functions by so many technological terms of material law but such blind scientists forget the lawmaker. The Srimad-Bhagavatam points out the lawmaker. One should not be amazed by the mechanical arrangement of the complicated engine or dynamo, but one should praise the engineer who creates such a wonderful working machine. That is the difference between the devotee and the non-devotee. Devotees are always full with praising the Lord who directs the physical laws. In the Bhagavad Gita 9.10, the direction of the Lord upon the material nature is described as follows. Mayadhyakshena prakriti suyate sarcharacharam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. The material nature, full of physical laws, is one of my different energies. Therefore it is neither independent nor blind. Because I am transcendentally all-powerful, simply by my glancing over material nature, the physical laws of nature work so wonderfully. The actions and reactions of the physical laws work on that account, and thus the material world is created, maintained, and annihilated again and again. Men with a poor fund of knowledge, however, become astonished by studying the physical laws, both within the construction of the individual body and within the cosmic manifestation, and foolishly they decry the existence of God, taking it for granted that the physical laws are independent, without any metaphysical control. The Bhagavad Gita 9.11 replies to this foolishness in the following words: Avajananti ma mudha manushim tanamashritam parang bhavamajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. The foolish men, mudha, do not know the personality of God in His eternal form of bliss and knowledge. The foolish man thinks of the transcendental body of the Lord as something like his own, and therefore he cannot think of the unlimited controlling power of the Lord, who is not visible in the acting of the physical laws. The Lord is, however, visible to the naked eyes of people in general when He descends Himself by His own personal potency. Lord Krishna incarnated Himself as He is and played very wonderful parts as the Lord Himself. And the Bhagavad Gita concerns such wonderful actions and knowledge. Yet foolish men will not accept Lord Krishna as the Supreme Lord. Generally, they consider the infinitesimal and infinite features of the Lord because they themselves are unable to become either the infinitesimal or the infinite. But one should know that the infinite and infinitesimal sizes of the Lord are not His highest glories. The most wonderful manifestation of the Lord's power is exhibited when the infinite Lord becomes visible to our eyes as one of us. Yet His activities are different from those of the finite beings. Lifting a mountain at the age of 7 years and marrying 16,000 wives in the prime of His youth are some of the examples of His infinite energy. But the mudhas, after seeing them or hearing about them, decry them as legendary and take the Lord as one of them. They cannot understand that Lord Sri Krishna, although in the form of a human being by His own potency, is still the Supreme Lord with full potency as the Supreme Controller. When, however, the mudhas give submissive and oral reception to the messages of the Lord, as in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, or in the Srimad-Bhagavatam through the channel of disciplic succession, such mudhas also become devotees of the Lord by the grace of His pure devotees. And for this reason only, either in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the pastimes of the Lord in the material world are delineated for the benefit of those men with a poor fund of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and to all the assembled devotees. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhabeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. This verse is describing a phase of the unfoldment of the material world, as in the word vinirbhidya, which means there are divisions created by the glance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is infused with the energy of time, karma, and the living entities are at that time with the glance of the Mahā-Viṣṇu injected into the primordial substance of the material world, and because of the force of the perverted desires of the living entities from previous creations, as described in the first canto, second chapter of the Bhagavatam, ātmano gunamayer bhaver ebi sukshmendriyatma biswar nirmiteshu nirvishto bhunte bhuteshu chadgunan, that after the living entities are released again into the material nature, having rested in the body of the Mahā-Viṣṇu for approximately 311 trillion years, then they revive again their desires for enjoyment in the material world. And it's to facilitate those desires that the Supreme Personality of Godhead then provides 8,400,000 species for the living entities to experiment in the material world. The origin, as pointed out here, which is the important point, is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we hear from the beginning of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is pointing back to Krishna. It's following the Bhagavatam, and that, as I mentioned, ete chamsha kala pumsam, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, aham sarvasya prabhavo matak sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. When one knows the origin of everything, and knows that origin is personal, and is Krishna, then such a person becomes attached to that source and gives one's heart. We're looking to give our heart somewhere. It's the nature of the living being. We have to, because we're a heartful energy. And not just energy, we're persons with heart. And it's the nature of every living entity to love. But when we miss the object of that love, as a country song that was popular for some time and has been covered many times goes in a lyric, looking for love in all the wrong places. That's the plight of the living entity in the material world. So this information that there is an origin, and coming back to the source, we find in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita starts off, of course, in the Mangalacharana, first offering obeisances to the gurus, Vande Gurun Isha Bhaktan, Ishan Isha Avatarakam, Tat Prakasham Sachakti, Krishna Chaitanya Samjakam, and then Krishna in the form of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityanando Sahodito, Gaudadai Pushpavanto Chitro Shando Tamo Nidao, says that Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, who are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna and Balaram, they've appeared on the horizon of Gauda, the way one might or may not see the sun and moon rise on the horizon simultaneously. And why is that? To give benediction to everybody in the age of Kali Yuga. But then the author goes on, much the way the Bhagavatam goes. In the beginning, we have this clear understanding of how the creation unfolds and who are the expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yadadvaitam brahmo panishari tarapyasya tanuba ya ātman tarayami puruṣa iti so shamshabhibhavaha shadaishvaryai purno ya iha bhagavan swayamayam the chaitanyat krishnas jagati paratatvam paramiha, describing how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the Brahman. And we talked about the other day how Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita clarifies the science of the absolute truth. And for those who are attached to Brahman, he says, Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyasacha shashvatasya cha dharmasya sukaisya kantikasya cha. And that I'm the origin of the Brahman. We know from Brahma Samhita also, Yasya prabha prabhapato jagadanda koti koti shrashesha vasudari vibhuti vinam tad brahma nishkalamanantam ashesha bhutam govindamadi puruṣantam aham bhajami. That Krishna's Brahman effulgence is like the sun. It's manifesting all the varieties in the world by its potency, but it's the impersonal effulgence of the Lord. And then he describes in this verse from the Mangalacharna, does Kaviraj Goswami, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's Krishna, is the Paramatma within everyone's heart. And this is something Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita also, throughout. He refers to the Paramatma, one of his expansions. In the verse we heard here, Mayadhyakshena Prakriti, referring to the puruṣa-avatāra, and also as Paramatma, Sarvasya chaham hridi sanivishto, matak smitir ghanam apohanam cha. Krishna says, I'm within everyone's heart. That's the Kshirodakshai Viṣṇu, or the super soul. And then he says, but also I'm Bhagavan. So this parallels the verse in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 2nd chapter, Varanti tattva vidas tattvam yajñānam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. The absolute truth is advaya. He's one thing, but there's variety within that oneness. And that's Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Then there's several more verses in the Mangalacharna, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which maybe I'll go back to in a minute, but then Kaviraj Goswami describes creation. And he mentions how there are these puruṣas. Maya Bhartajanda Sangashrayanga Shete Shakshat Karanam Bodhi Madhya Madhya Yashyai Kamsa Shi Puman Adi Devas Tamshi Nityananda Rama Prapadya. And he says these puruṣas, they're coming from Balaram or Nityananda Balaram. So first there's Krishna, then there's his first expansion, which is Balaram. And then Balaram expands into the Chaturvyuha. And then there's Mahasankarshan, and then there's the secondary Chaturvyuha, and then comes Mahā-Viṣṇu, and then Garbhodaka Viṣṇu, and Kshirodakshai Viṣṇu, and then of course we have Ananta Shesha. Shesha means the remainder. And as Kaviraj Goswami describes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the abhiman, or the attitude of every one of the expansions of Krishna, is to serve Krishna. Balaram serves Krishna as his paraphernalia. He manifests the spiritual world, all the facility there in the spiritual world for Krishna's enjoyment. And then the Mahapuruṣas, they manifest the material world, because that's one of Krishna's facilities and a place of his pastimes, the Srishti Lila. And then there's Shesha, Ananta Shesha. Shesha means the remainder. Any service left over that wasn't taken by anybody else, he takes that. And so Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. Everybody else is cooperating to enjoy. The only ones who aren't are the Nityabadhas. They're left out because they don't have a service mood towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, as described by the personified Vedas in the 11th canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, there's a primary purpose of the Srishti Lila. Krishna is breathing out and then breathing in every time he breathes out. Yashaika nishvasita kala matava lamya jivanti loma vilaja jaganandanata Vishnur Mahansa Ihayasya Kala Vishesha Govindamari Puruṣamta Mahama Bhajami. With every exhalation from the Mahā-Viṣṇu comes out all the creation of all the worlds, through which, by his glance, he impregnates the living entities back into the material nature, and they begin their work again here in the material world. And then there's Garbhodaka Vishnu, who enters into the universe, each one of the individual universes that are manifested by Mahā-Viṣṇu. And then he fills up half the universe with his perspiration and lies on that Garbhodaka ocean. And then from his navel comes the lotus, the stem, upon which Brahma is born. And then he expands himself again into Kshirodakṣai Vishnu. Ekop yasau rachaditam jagaranda kotim yachaktirasti jagaranda chayayananta andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam govindamadi puruṣamtam ham bhajami. He enters into every particle, every atom, the heart of every living being. So he's all pervading in that way. And what is his purpose? Purpose is twofold. One is, because Krishna, as he says in the Bhagavad Gita, samoham sarvabhuteshu name dvesho stinapira ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya maite teshu chapyaham. He gives a facility for the living entity to try to enjoy separately from him. And he's neutral in that. Although Prabhupada mentions in the Bhagavatam that Krishna doesn't want the living entities to come to the material world. And when they insist, then he gives them an opportunity to try to enjoy separately so they can come to their ultimate sense of purpose, which is to serve Krishna. And that's the main purpose for which Krishna has created the material world, is that the living being will come back to his senses and take up the process of Krishna consciousness again. So why are we hearing about the creation again and again? And this, from this particular verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur particularly mentions that there's a way in which those who are absorbed in Maya, when they hear more and more about Maya and how it works, then there's a way that they can become sober and decide that they don't want to be involved in the material world, and they can take shelter of Krishna. And we also heard in the purport here this conundrum about which kind of katha to listen to. Why not listen, comes the rhetorical question, to the pastimes of Krishna in Mathura of Vrindavan. Remember that in the purport? Why not listen to that? Why all this talk about the creation, and why not just go straight to the pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan? Well, it's a good question. Of course, Prabhupada published the Krishna book and said distribute it to everybody. He also published the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and the Upadeshamrita, after which the publishers asked Prabhupada, is this for the devotees, right? Like, no, mass. Mass distribution. But there is a point to be made here. That's why the question comes up. Which one should we listen to? So, first let's look at one end. At the end of the Rasa Panchadhyaya, or the chapters on the Rasa Lila in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the last verse says, Vikriditam Brajavadubiraham cha Vishnu, Shradhanvitona Shrinu Yadatavarna Yedya. Bhaktim Param Bhagavati Pratilabhyakamam Hridrogam Ashpapatino Yacharina Dira. That if one listens to the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, especially his playful pastimes with the Vrajavadu, or the gopis of Vrindavan, as is confirmed by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, such topics have such potencies that hridrogam ashpapahino ajacharina dhira, one can give up the dread disease of the heart, which is kama or lust, and one can become attached to Krishna in the spiritual world. But as pointed out by our acharyas, there are a couple of key words in the verse itself. One is shraddhanvito. Shraddha means that one has to have the proper context to understand or appreciate those pastimes without mistaking that Krishna is an ordinary person. And the other is dhira. It means that one has to become sober-minded. And once one has this sense of sobriety from hearing about the crushing effects of Maya, and one becomes serious about the process of extricating oneself from the material world. With those two, Shraddha, meaning faith in the fact that Krishna is not an ordinary person. And how does one develop that? By hearing Sambandha Gyan. What is my non-relationship with the material world? Who is Krishna? What's my relationship with him? What's his nature? And then also becoming sober. Then one can take advantage of the pastimes in Mathura Vrindavan. So this is the answer to the question, why hear about creation again and again? And how does it help us in the process of Krishna consciousness? Okay, now let's see, since we are already in conversation about this verse and everything else related to it from the previous verses, which questions you can ask to expand the conversation. Yes, Prabhu.
What is the universe? What is the universe? Is everything we possibly can perceive our universe? Can we look into other universes? Or are they totally separate from each other?
It's described how each universe is a contained unit. Within each universe, Om Bhur Bhuva Swa, there are various realms, Bhur, Bhuva, Swa. Sometimes describe the 14 worlds. Bhagavatam describes how the middle planetary systems is where we are. Sri Brahma Samhita also gives categorical description. Goloka namni nijadamni chaleta tasya devi mahesha haridam suteshu teshu te te prabhava nijaya vihitasya govindamadi puruṣam tamaham bhajami. Lowest of all is located Devidam, that's where we are. Above Devidam is Maheshnam. Each one of the universes is enclosed. And they're earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. The material elements Krishna describes as bhumi, rapo, nalo, vayu, etc. Those are the layers on the periphery of the universe. And each one successively is 10 times thicker than the other. That's all cataloged in the Brihat Bhagavatamrita when Gopakumar is intrepidly moving from one place to another. He goes to Maheshtam, even goes to Vaikuntha. When he's leaving or traveling up to the realm of liberation, just beyond the material universe, there's a Viraja, that's the Karna Ocean, where there's no modes of material nature. And there's also the region of Brahman. And as he's moving through the material world, he goes through the different layers of the universe. Each one of the layers has a presiding deity within it, and each one has its own attractive nature. And there's a way that he goes from one to the next. Each one of the deities of the layers is described, and then he comes to the abode of liberation, or the impersonal Brahman. And the universes are described by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami as individual units, but there are many of them. And he gives the example of a bag of mustard seeds. So you imagine a mustard seed is a little round, and there's a bag full of them. So practically they're unlimited. You can't count mustard seeds. It'd be too difficult. Maybe ChatGPT could do it now. So, although I wouldn't trust the answer. So it's like that. The universes are innumerable, and each one is self-contained. Living beings are contained within a particular realm because of their previous karmas. They have to live in a particular realm because previous activities, either sattva, rajas, tamas. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives this summary that Brahmanda Brahmate Kon Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhakti Lata Beach, that we're wandering in these Brahmandas from one to the next, or within one. But the soul can go anywhere. Sarvagataha means it can be in any realm at any time. He's marginal and can exist anywhere. So in the sojourn of the soul, there's a way in which hopefully comes in contact with, as we read yesterday, a sadhu vaidya. Vaidya means doctor. And the sadhu vaidya has a little black bag, and in the bag he has mantra and upadesh. Upadesh and mantra means he has instructions and mantras to give out. And then the soul can extricate himself from the material world altogether. In the second canto, we also hear about how living entities who become liberated when they leave a particular universe, some of them just want to go straight back to the spiritual world. They've had enough, seen enough. Some of them like to take the scenic route and see where they've been. Because it's rather confusing. I think I mentioned the other day the verse from Bhagavad Gita, Narupa masyeha tatopa labhyate. It's hard to see where we are or figure it out. But when you're leaving, there's some perspective, you can see what's going on. Savas Prabhu.
So the question is, why has Krishna put the living entity under the influence of material energy or Maya? For what reason? Why would the Supreme Lord do such a thing?
This is to honor the independence of the living entity. Without the option of living separately from the Lord, there's no question of independence or free will. So Krishna honors always the free will of the living being. In the Gita, going back to the verse I mentioned, Samoham sarvabhuteshu nami dveshosti napriya. He's equal to every living entity. And of course, ye yatam mam prapadyante tam stataiva bhajamyaham. That Krishna says, I respond to the desire of each living being. He has an eternal relationship. We have an eternal relationship with Krishna, but it's not Krishna who breaks off the relationship. Krishna has unlimited independence. We have minute independence. We're a little sample of Krishna. So when we misuse that sense of our free will, although it's tiny, it's minute, then Krishna facilitates it by giving the material world. 8,400,000. That's a lot of rides to go on. Consider like an amusement park. Did they have them here? Euro Disney? Did that fail? Still there? I don't know how many rides there are, but they're not 8,400,000. But if you send your kid to the amusement park and he goes on 8,400,000 rides, there's no complaining afterwards because you've done them all. Yes, Prabhu?
It almost seems like Krishna is just playing games with the living entity, because at the same time, Krishna, by his supreme will or mercy, he can liberate the living entity.
Yes, but the ultimate point is the loving relationship Krishna has. So just think of it in your own terms. Let's say someone decides to leave you, and if you force them to come back, or you don't give them an alternative, then how will you ever have cognizance of a loving relationship? It's the free will is the ultimate show. And that's what it comes down to. It's this idea that the Lord can just make the material world the spiritual world, the spiritual world the material world. That this doesn't offer the option of the living entity to try to separate himself from Krishna. But when there's this cognizance that Krishna is everything, and that he's my loving friend, and there's a reawakening, and one sees that there's an option, and the person personally chooses it, then that's when real spiritual contact and traction begins. So let's look at it in terms of, we've watched sometimes in our organization, kids grow up in Krishna consciousness. And they'll, at a certain point, in child developmental, child psychology, developmental psychology, there are different phases of consciousness for kids, right? And at a certain age, not even talking about devotees, there's a time in which the kid wants to leave the nest and feel independent. The kid's not sure, do I exist myself? Am I real? Do I have my own volition? Is everything I'm doing made up by my parents, and am I just following them? What about me? What is my independent position? And we see, just giving this example because it's probably comprehensible, that when a kid grows up in Krishna consciousness, we see at a certain age, whether it's 13 or 15 or 16, 17, we recognize the phenomena that they may question, is Krishna consciousness something that I want to do? Is it my parents' idea? It was my idea. I just grew up in it. Right? We've all heard this. So there's a moment of truth when that kid will decide and say, okay, I don't want to be a devotee. Or that kid may go out and try a few rides in the material world. We've seen that before too. Right? So let's just see what it's like. What are these four regulative principles that have been imposed upon me throughout my youth? Now let me go and see what it's like to not follow the four regulative principles. That's happened more than once. And then at a certain time, they may change their mind and come back. So let's just say, following your question, Savas Prabhu, that the kid leaves, says, I don't want to follow the four regulative principles, what to speak of Ekadashi, or chanting 16 rounds, or anything to do with Hare Krishna. And then you go and you say, you round them up somewhere and say, no, you come back. And I'm your parent, I have the power, so you have to do what I say. You follow the four regulative principles, you chant 16 rounds, you be a devotee. And the kid's there, no, I'm not into it. But you lock him in his room and say, we're only going to give you prasadam and that's it. And you can't call your girlfriend because we're cutting off the internet. Whatever it might be. So then if the kid finally says, yeah, I love you, what kind of utterance is that? Is it real? Krishna, on the other hand, he gives the living entity full facility and says, okay, you want to go check it out? Yes. What's the purpose? So that he'll ultimately come back to this point and wholeheartedly decide that, no, I don't want Maya. I want you, Krishna. That's the moment of truth. And that's, to Krishna, he doesn't need anything. ṇḍaṁ prabhurayam nijalabha purnam. He's purnam, complete in himself. He doesn't need anything from us. He's only looking for the loving relationship. So when a soul comes to this juncture and says, yeah, no, I don't want the material world anymore. I only want Krishna. That's a huge event. And that's what the whole purpose of the material creation is give that...
Does that mean that, okay, that means that the living entity is using or its independence at that time.
Then he's properly using his independence.
Yeah.
And that's why it's there, is to come back on the way there's no love. If you don't choose yourself, and it's a great responsibility to have some free will. Some people don't like it. And therefore, they misuse it. And then Krishna, as Brahma Prabhu was pointing out, I love that point, saying put him in the lower species of life. So it's kind of like a guy comes into town and he gets drunk and he starts shooting everything up. So the sheriff comes in and is like, okay, come on, Larry, get in the prison, or in the jail. He throws him in the jail, takes away his gun, lets him sober up a little bit. You okay now? You can come out. So Krishna puts us in these lockdown conditions so that we don't do any more harm. We sober up. That's why you have to become dhira and realize the material world's no joke. It's not like a fun place, and it's not that Krishna doesn't appreciate the fact, but it's not that Krishna, as Brahma Prabhu was pointing out, it's not punitive. It's not trying to punish the living entity. It's what we choose. Ignorance means ignorance. Ignorance means I want to forget my benefactor. And when you forget any living being, there's a darkness that comes into your life. Just like I notice when I'm walking on the street, somebody's coming towards me, I'm walking past them, like in the suburbs, when there's nobody else around, I'm thinking, should I say good morning or not? If I don't, I walk by another living being, the super soul's there, the soul's there, and I walk by and I just keep my eyes down. There's some kind of darkness, like I didn't make contact. And the whole material world's like that, because everyone's ignoring God, and they're saying, God, there's no cause to anything. And so everyone's in this tense state of dark energy, or enveloped by dark energy, because of purposefully ignoring Krishna. Prabhu, you had your hand up? Okay.
Okay, you said that, isn't Krishna locking us in a room and not giving us the prasad also? So you said that there's free will, and what kind of free will is it that if I don't do what he wants, I have to suffer?
What kind of free will is it that what?
That if I don't do what he wants, then I have to suffer.
Well, it's more that for instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's not preaching religious fanaticism, that hey, y'all's going to hell and you're going to burn. He points out that here's how the energies of the world work. Tattva means to understand categories of energy. Tat is a demonstrative pronoun. It means you can point to something. The word that and tat are the same word. It comes from Sanskrit. You just add an H. So I say that table. So I'm pointing to something. Say that exists. That's a table. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that Nasato vitate bhavo, nabhavo vitate sata, upayor apidrishnon tastvanios tattvadarshibi. Those who are knowers of truth, tattvadarshibi, they know the categories of energy. And therefore they know that the material world's temporary, and they know that there's another energy that they belong to, which is superior. And if you mistake one for the other, that's a category mistake. It's a big mistake. And the Sri Upanishad says, Anyadevahor sambhavad, anyadahora sambhavad, iti shushramdhiranam yenas tadvid chakshade. You should know the difference, because there's a huge difference in the result that you get from worshiping the supreme cause of all causes and that which is not supreme. And so in the Gita, Krishna points all these things out to us, and he says, okay, if you want to live in the material world, yesham twantakatam papam jananam punyakarmanam, if you live in the mode of goodness, you really won't suffer that much, except that you're still separated from Krishna. So there's that unfulfilled desire within the heart. And he gives that facility in every culture, for instance, the Vedas are meant so that people can harmonize with living in the material world, so they don't have to suffer that much. Yagnartak kamano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tarartam karma konteya muktasanga samachara. He gives yagya, and he gives all the ways in which you can take care of yourself, all your needs will be supplied, and so forth. It's just when the living entities become calcitrant and they want to totally disobey the orders of God. In the Kali Yuga, it's rampant. You don't see it in other ages, like in Satya Yuga. People are generally not suffering that much. And so Krishna's material world is, you can navigate it to some degree with the information that he gives, but you still aren't at the ultimate point, which is to love Krishna. So in other words, it's not that Krishna is putting us, it's not unreasonable at all. It's completely well-reasoned, and it comes down to the fact that we have to take responsibility. In the Gita, Krishna says this is something we have to overcome, the psychological defect that God's doing this to me. That's a defect. And that's practically every living being has. God's doing this to me. And jira means we take responsibility. If you've ever met a responsible person, you go like, wow, where'd you come from? You don't claim victimhood. You don't complain. You take responsibility for your actions. And so, tate nukampam susamikshamano bunjana ematma vikam vipakam ridvagva purvir viridam namaste jiveta yomukti sadet pade sadaya bhak. Brahma says, one who's eligible to go back to Godhead is one who has comprehended the nature of the material world, knows the categories of energies, and then comes to understand that I got myself into this. That means tenu kampam susamikshamano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam. Vipakam, you might recognize the word from reading the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam. You know kumbhipaka? That's the big pot that people get cooked in for having cooked, lobsters. Or here you go, fella, jump in, And he goes his next life saying, okay, you little fella, now you get in and see how you like it. It's sensitivity training. And so he says, Brahma says, we're cooking ourselves. I got the pot, I put in the water, I turned on the heat, then I got in. And I'm even stirring the pot while I'm in it. And then I'm saying, like, why is it so hot in here? And what's the problem? And so he says, okay, little jiva, grow up, take responsibility, and then accept that you're also powerful. You're also a cognizant being, and you have free will. You're not a dead stone. It's not like someone threw you in somewhere with no cause. I did it to myself. And when you can come to that point of understanding, then accept that I should make the best use of a bad bargain. Look, I made a bad bargain, okay? I admit it. Go home, tell your family, look, we're going to have a little economic setback here. I think I made a really bad deal. It's like, we're going to live with this. And then we're going to get through it. then you go on with your life. And so if one can overcome vita, raga, bhaya, krodha, get over the anger that like, whoa, it's like, okay, I'm a living being. I'm in this situation. God didn't do it to me. And the fact is, when we rise above the mental state and we actually feel the blissful from Krishna consciousness, there is no more sense. It evaporates. That sense of blaming God, it goes away. It's like the light comes in, and that dark energy that is caused by us ignoring God, it dissipates. Sorry, Prabhu, go ahead. No, I want to hear what you have to say.
So I was just thinking that when the living entity becomes completely frustrated by the material energy, then Krishna then gives them the intelligence then, is that right? I mean...
Not necessarily. So, in the Forest of Material Enjoyment, that chapter in the 5th canto?
Yeah.
It talks about how the living entity gets frustrated all the time. He gets embarrassed, frustrated. As they used to say in St. Louis, we'd present a book to somebody and go, look, I'm broke, busted, and disgusted. And so the living entity's broke, busted, and disgusted. But it's not necessarily that he turns to Krishna. So that's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says to Sanatana Goswami, Maya mugda jivana nahi swata Krishna gyan, jivara kripaya koila Krishna Veda Puran. That's why we have these books.
Yeah.
It's like swata. It's not automatic that the living entity comes out of Maya. There has to be an intervention. And in this verse, he's saying there has to be a knowledge intervention. It comes from
Krishna?
Veda.
Krishna gives him that intelligence?
He gives, to Lord Chaitanya. He says it to Sanatana Goswami. Maya mugda jivananaya. The living entity is in ignorance, in Maya. And it's not swata, automatic that he comes out. Jivara kripaya koila. It's out of mercy of who? Veda Vyas, who gives us the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, that the living entity then, he gets the book and he looks at it and goes, oh, okay. Wrong turn, sorry, I'm going to change my mind now. He said, there has to intervene.
So who actually guides the living entity to look for a bona fide spiritual master?
Then when there's some intervention and the living being gets some contact with the devotees, this is why it's so important. Brahmanda Brahmate Kon Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. There's a way in which that seed gets planted in the heart. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says it's called Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti. There's this, by coming in contact with the Krishna through the Shastras, through the devotees, or doing some Agata Sukriti. They don't know, they don't have full knowledge yet, but they do something with the devotees. Or even with the holy name. It's described how Sanketyam parihasam va, stovam shelaram evava, that they can hear the holy name even if they reject it. They already heard it. So it leaves a little indelible imprint in their heart. And then when that starts to grow, as Prabhupada puts it, it's like a bank account in the heart. When you start to get an accumulation of that bhakti unmukhi sukriti, then there's a time at which it fructifies into shraddha. Adau, shraddha, tatha, sadhusanga. And then, as Prabhupada described, it has a sense of, oh, yeah, life, that makes sense. That's somebody who has accumulated something in their heart to the point where they have shraddha. And then they can start their process of sadhusanga, bhajana kriya.
Yeah.
Did I interrupt your question?
Yeah.
You keep going, please.
I'll think a little.
No, say more.
Well, it seems to me that it's a rare situation when this actually occurs. And like, for instance, even myself, I don't see how I fit in the whole situation by just walking down the street, getting a Krishna book, and then running into a great soul like Srila Prabhupada. That's like a mystery. It seems like you don't know how that actually even transpires. But when it happens, it's almost like it was meant to be. So how do you understand that principle? I mean, it's very mystical.
Yeah, Krur said that too. When he was offering his prayers on the way to Mathura to pick up Krishna, he says, we're like logs floating on this endless river. He said, but there is a time when the log washes up on the shore. And who's to say when and how it does? It is kind of a mystery. Prabhupada writes in the 8th chapter of the Gita, in the 22nd verse, in this purport, he says that it's very difficult for us to understand how we came to the material. In fact, it's impossible. We can't understand it. He says, but Krishna knows. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says in the Jaiva Dharma that there is a time at which we come to understand. But even before that, it doesn't matter to us, because the whole conundrum of the material world, being entrapped in this idea that I'm a material body and I'm part of the world and I'm suffering because of it, as soon as we see that we're not, then all those psychological anomalies become insignificant. And the search for, like, why did God do this to me? How did I get into this position? It's part of the entanglement in Maya. And then the Stita Dir Muni, that's what Krishna describes in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asks him, what's somebody fixed in consciousness? The Stita Dir Muni just takes the version that's given, and clear version, it's impossible to know right now, but trust the medicine and you'll come to understand more clearly.
So, but Krishna has a part in it also in terms of giving that soul that knowledge, right? Because as you said, he's in Sarvascha Hamridi.
Definitely. Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. By Guru you get Krishna, by Krishna you get Guru, vice versa. But it's one in which Uddhava, he expresses this gratitude. At the end of the teachings with Krishna to Uddhava, he says, Naivo payantya pachitim kavayastevesha brahma yusha pikridam rida mudasmaranta yontar bahistanu bratam ashubham badunvan acharya chaitya vapusha swagatim vyanakti. Krishna, I cannot express enough gratitude to you, even if I had many lifetimes of Brahma. If my ayu, my lifespan, was like Brahma's many times over, I could not come to the end of expressing my gratitude to you. Why? He says, because you conspire to take me out of the material world. You come externally as the acharya, and internally you're there as the antaryami to instruct me, to show me your own path back to Godhead. You're there for me. So he's saying, thank you, Krishna. One of my godbrothers, he told me, first thing he does after he wakes up in the morning, he goes to a picture of Prabhu and he stands for it and he goes, thank you, Srila Prabhu. Prabhu.
Just a continuation of that question. It seems at the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada clearly says that the hint is that Mudha all of a sudden submissively, orally receives this message through the disciplic channel of disciplic succession, Bhagavad Gita or Srimad-Bhagavatam. And we hear it in Bhagavad Gita, that you have to be submissive. The knowledge in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 8th verse, starts with humility. But how on earth the Mudha, who is a rebellious by nature, all of a sudden is supposed to hear submissively from devotees?
Well, that's where Lord Nityananda's mercy comes in.
Okay.
Because there's a way to describe Mayamrigam Dayatayipsnisam Anvadavad by Garbhodaka Muni in the Bhagavatam. He says, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the age of Kali, he runs after the souls. And he'll give Krishna consciousness to anyone who asks for it. But Lord Nityananda gives mercy to everyone even if they don't ask for it. And so that's our benediction in the Kali Yuga, because people really don't, everyone knows Prayanal Payusha Shabdya Kalavasmin Yugajana Manda Sumana Matayo Manda Bhagya Hupab. People are really slow to take up. The verse says they're really slow to take up spiritual practice, and also they have really bad ideas. Manda Bhagya Hupab. And so,
Ideas about what?
Huh?
Ideas about what?
Everything. I mean, who thought up making a nuclear bomb? And now everyone lives on the edge of their seat for the rest of their life, because what a great idea. Let's make a bomb that can annihilate all of existence. Devamrita Swami brought it up. It's like, what other species does that? Pollute themselves out of existence. That's a bad idea. Prabhupada pointed it out all the time. All these technological advancements and so forth. So then, Garbhodaka is talking about the glories of Lord Chaitanya in the Bhagavatam, and he says, he's a kalim sabhajayantyarya gunagya sarabhagina yatra sankirtane naiva sarvaswarto bilabhite. If you're born in Kali Yuga, you're in luck. Isn't that, it's so uplifting. Yeah. In the Kali Yuga, people who know the value of Kali Yuga, Kalim Sabha Jayantyarya Guna Gya Sarabhagina, those who know the sar, or the essence of what Kali Yuga is about, or what you can get from it, Yatra sankirtanenaiva, from Sankirtan he says, sarva swarto, sarva artha. You get all of the topmost desires you may have fulfilled by the process of Sankirtan. Sarva swarto abhilabhyate. So he says, Kali Yuga, how do you come to perfection? You get Lord Nityananda's mercy. And we've seen, all of us, how in the Sankirtan movement, seemingly the most unqualified people come. You really can't complain. You say, who let that guy in? You say, like, who let you in? Everybody's like that in the Kali Yuga. Like, how did we get here? Lord Nityananda's mercy. And Prabhupada went around and sat with the lowest of the low, and at the end of a program he didn't have any money, so he just cut up an apple and give everyone a piece of apple and chant Hare Krishna, give him access. You think of great representatives of Prabhupada like Jayananda Prabhu, he'd pull people off the street. There's two devotees who were gangbangers that he met when he was doing his Sankirtan, and he went over to their house after he met them, and he cooked breakfast for them. And they said, are there any more people like you in the world? He said, no, we got a whole bunch down in San Francisco. They came and joined the temple. This is Lord Nityananda's mode, to go to people door to door, just search them out and give them special mercy even if they don't want it. That's what's fun about the Krishna consciousness movement. Anything goes because of the mercy of Lord Nityananda, right?
Absolutely. It's also a mercy manifestation of Krishna.
Yeah.
Spiritual manifestation.
Well, we're all meant to be representatives of Lord Nityananda. That's why, Prabhupada said, go out and give it to others. And look at, Prabhupada brought it, and who went and expanded the movement? A bunch of kids. Mukunda didn't even want it. He was on his way, after he helped Prabhupada in New York City, and then he talks about it in his biography. He was walking out the door to go to San Francisco and then catch a flight to India because he wanted to get into music, like sitar or something, like just ring, 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 because he was a musician.
He was a drummer, man.
He played piano. Mukunda Maharaj, yeah.
Did he come with a kettle drum to the festival?
Maybe, I don't know about that. And musicians, they're into a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Was it? Musician. So anyway, so when he's leaving New York City after he helped Prabhupada, and he thought, okay, well, that was one chapter in my life. And then on his way out the door, Prabhupada says, oh, by the way, why don't you start a center in San Francisco? And he's like caught halfway through the doorway. What did he just tell me? Start a center, and all the way on the plane to San Francisco, I was thinking, now I got to start another temple here. Then he met Malati, Shamasundar, the whole thing unfolded, the mantra rock dance, and then Malati, Shamasundar, Gurudas, and Jamuna, they come to Prabhupada and said, there's this group called the Beatles. We want to go to England. And Prabhupada said, yeah, go ahead. They didn't have any money. They just, go ahead. They had to show cash to get in the country. So they'd show the cash. Somehow they'd send it back to the other ones, and they'd show the same cash, get the next one. And they lived in Malati describes how she and Saraswati lived in a refrigerator box. Someone purchased a refrigerator, and in the person's garage in England, they had cut that into a little dwelling in the garage, and that's what they lived in. And then they met the Beatles. And then next thing. And Malati says the first time she went out to teach people the Maha Mantra, she didn't even know it, so she had to have it on a card and said, here it is. So Lord Nityananda, it's, the representative, Prabhupada came and he made it available, but then he empowered everybody. And he said, now you go out and give the same mercy to everybody, because that's the greatest show on earth. That's why in any generation, when devotees get a chance to go out and see it for themselves, how when they interject something into this powerful medicine, you have the little black bag, and you got mantra, you got instruction, and you give it to the living being, and you see suddenly they wake up. There's nothing better than that. That's what the Krishna consciousness movement is. it's a movement of going out and giving that mercy to as many people as possible. And then we get our own perspective from doing that. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, if you so desire, and Shri Shri Rukmini Dwarkadish, Shri Shri Gaurnitai, Jagannath Baladev, Subhadra, anybody else? Gandharvika Giridhari, Shri Shri Radha Damodar, Shri Shri Radha Govindari, Govardhanadari. If you so desire, please empower us to remember that the material world is not a place to it's not a trifling place. We should be dhira, very sober. Please also deputize us so that we can take part in giving the knowledge intervention to as many people as possible around the world. And please let us work together in harmony. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part. Please say Hare Krishna. Vācakālpavriṣṭha kripasindhabhe vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Nantu Koti Vaishnavini ki jai.